Okay, wait, stop everything. I am hosting a virtual pajama party on Thursday, February 19th at 7 p.m. Pacific time, and I need you there. This is a free 90-minute live Zoom hangout. We're doing Ask Me Anything. I'm pulling cards live. I'm giving intuitive guidance. We're talking, we're laughing, we're probably oversharing a little bit. It's gonna be so cute. Cameras are optional, but pajamas are mandatory. I don't care if they're silk, flannel, oversized, or frilly. If you've ever listened to this podcast and thought, I wish I could just hang out with her, this is literally that. This is our cozy little interactive pocket of reality. Visit zoegreco.com to get the Zoom details and links to join February 19th, 7 p.m. Pacific. Put it in your calendar and I will see you there. Hello, and thank you for calling the Higher Self Hotline, your direct line to the divine. You've been led here by your inner knowing, and you've arrived right on cue. I'm your host, Zoe Greco, and together we'll make the ethereal earthly, helping you consciously embody your spiritual knowing and most authentic self. Please listen carefully to the following options. To discover how to fulfill your soul's purpose, press 1. To unlock infinite abundance in life, love, and career, press 2. To heal your mind, body, and spirit, press 3. To speak with your personal spirit guides, press 0. Please hold while we connect you to your highest timeline. Hello, Divine Darlings, and welcome back to the Higher Self Hotline. I'm your host, Zoe Greco. Thank you so much for joining me today. And today, I am so incredibly pleased to bring you the one and only Dr. Katie Carhart. Dr. Carhart is a licensed clinical psychologist and the founder of Align and Empower Therapy, a virtual practice for adults and couples. With over 13 years of clinical experience, she helps clients move from burnout and survival mode toward more regulated, connected, and fulfilling lives. Her work blends evidence-based therapy with polyvagal and somatic principles, helping people better understand and work with the uniqueness of their own nervous system and brain. In addition to her clinical work, Dr. Carhart has taught psychology at the college level for over a decade and shares accessible, human-centered mental health education on social media to make evidence-based insights practical and relatable in everyday life. Hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
You know, we were speaking before we officially began, and first of all, we have a lot in common, which is cool. We're both East Coast transplants who find ourselves now in Arizona. When we first got on, for listeners, I was like, where are you from? And then I looked right behind Dr. Katie and found some beautiful saguaro cactuses that I recognize by being in my own backyard. So I love that we're so close to one another, and definitely need to meet up for a meal in Tucson because the food is incredible.
Yeah.
But, you know, one of the reasons I really wanted to bring you on today is because I resonate so deeply with your work. I found you on TikTok, and I really believe in highlighting the voices of people who are doing authentic, meaningful work of, you know, true service to others. And I just really see that in you. And so I was just really excited to bring you on today to have this conversation.
I'm really excited to have it.
I would love to start by understanding how your journey sort of brought you toward this specific work, because we're touching on the fact that your work is trauma informed. It involves polyvagal theory, somatic practices. Like, what led you toward wanting to work on the nervous system and the way that it contains and processes stress? Like, what brought you to that kind of focus in your work?
So I worked in a prison system, so a maximum security prison, for many years. And it was fascinating in that I would be in this system, and the way we were trained to deal with the men that we worked with that were sort of behavioral problems was to see it as manipulative and to intervene in the behavior. And what I found over time is that they all had trauma histories. And so, you know, what would look like a behavior on the surface, so someone reacting really big to something seemingly minor, when you got in and talked to them, it would really be trauma. So they had very, very complex trauma histories, and it really didn't work to try to address the behavior. We really had to get more involved in dealing with the trauma. So that led me to researching more trauma-informed therapy. And then the longer I stayed in the system, I realized that my staff were starting to show the same types of concerns. So they were more anxious. The longer they had been in the system, they would be more reactive. They would almost present as feeling like their frustration tolerance was a lot lower. And I realized that the trauma of being in that system was impacting them. And so then I started researching trauma-informed teams and vicarious trauma. And then I started to get burned out. And I would come home at the end of the workday and, do the night routine with my kids and then just plop on the couch and have nothing left. I would just go into complete shutdown. And so then I really started to put the pieces together in realizing that trauma, it affects all of us. And when we have these experiences, if we're just ignoring them and we're not doing the things we need to do to take care of our bodies, of our nervous system, that we're really doing ourselves a disservice. So then I started doing a lot of research in polyvagal theory, somatic therapy. And that's when I realized that I really had to make a shift. And then that was the work I wanted to do because it was sort of like the theme that tied it all together. And what I was seeing was really impacting people.
Wow. First of all, I feel like we could have a whole conversation about the prison system. Like that's something that I actually spent time as a volunteer in women's prisons in California for quite some time while I was in college and after. As you were speaking about the impact that it had on your team and your staff, of course, just because those people get to go home at the end of the day, they're still spending their entire day in this environment, which again, we could have a whole conversation about the idea of rehabilitation versus incarceration and the need for reform. Yes. So now I'm like, okay, notes for later, Dr. Carhart, let's come back to this conversation. But, what you're describing really actually resonated deeply with me in my own experience of, understanding myself as a emotionally reactive person. I'm a spiritually gifted human being. That's what I do. So with that comes the territory of being hypersensitive and hyper emotional intelligence and, high pattern recognition. And when you're so observant and the world is so chaotic and your immediate environment is chaotic or unstable or unpredictable, it obviously manifests in these ways that your responses are profoundly impacted to the point that other people recognize that as well. So as you were sharing that, I was just like, whoa, yeah, remembering what that felt like in my own body. But even in the work that I'm doing today with people, where I'm supporting people in, really diving into these immersive containers to rebuild their lives from authenticity, I'm so keenly aware of the importance of the nervous system in that process. Just even expanding your capacity to hold more of anything. So I'm really curious to understand in your work, when you weave together this trauma-informed therapy, this polyvagal theory, the somatic awareness, for those who are new to those concepts, how do you experience those coming together when you are in service to someone or working with someone? How do you see the ability to bring those together practically, but also thematically in the work that you do?
Yeah. So to me, trauma-informed therapy is really not asking what's wrong with the person. It's asking what happened to them and how did their body respond in trying to keep them safe. And so it really approaches therapy trying to create safety and giving them choice. So instead of, pushing people to disclose things before they're ready or pushing them to get rid of coping skills that may not serve them anymore, but served a purpose for such a long time, it's really important to meet them where they're at. So to me, trauma-informed therapy is sort of the framework. And then polyvagal theory, that was the newer piece to me in the last couple of years that I think has become so important. Originally coined by Stephen Porges, and then Deb Dana did a lot of work with this as well. But essentially, it's this idea that our nervous system is constantly scanning the environment for safety and for danger because its number one job is to keep us safe. And so we have a couple different nervous system states. We have our ventral vagal system, which is the system where we are present, connected. In science terms, we think of it as the rest and digest state. But really, it's the state where you feel like you could be your true self because you feel safe. And so often what we find is that we get activated into these other states. So fight or flight, that's our sympathetic nervous system. So this is like if you were in the forest and a bear appeared, your body would go into fight or flight, and it's absolutely the thing that it needs to do to keep you safe. So basically what's happening is the blood is rushing down to your muscles because you either have to run away or fight back. And so what that feels like in the body is your heart pounding. You might start to feel kind of fuzzy. You might hear the blood rushing in your ears. You might feel hot or flushed. And essentially the blood is leaving your brain and going to your muscles. So that means that our frontal lobe, which is the part of our brain that makes decisions, organizes things, makes decisions, it goes offline. And so our body doesn't want us to think, it wants us to respond. And so that's great when we're in front of a bear and we have to react and instinctively run. But our nervous system does not know the difference between a thought, a feeling, a snarky email, right? Like it doesn't know. And so in our everyday life, our nervous system can be getting activated all the time. And it doesn't feel helpful to be in that state because we actually want our frontal lobe to be online. And then finally, we have the freeze state. So that's like our dorsal vagal system. We call it like dorsal vagal collapse. So it's like when a possum plays dead because it just gets like so overwhelmed that it just collapses. And this happens when you're in an activated fight or flight state for too long. Our body just goes into this conservation mode. And that might feel like numbing, shutting down, feeling really far away from yourself. And so essentially we have these states, and the goal is not to feel calm all the time, because that's just not realistic. The nervous system serves a purpose, and we are going to get activated throughout the day. The goal is to move more flexibly between the states so that if I get a strongly worded email, right, and I push up into this fight or flight state, that I can recognize what's happening. I can take some steps to re-regulate. My frontal lobe will turn back online, and then I can make a thoughtful decision about how I want to respond. And if we're not aware of it, we may just feel stuck in the states. And so that's sort of the I guess what's happening in your body. And then somatic therapy is really the how. So somatic therapy is about how do we build capacity in the nervous system? How do we build safety in the body? And we do that through breathing, grounding, awareness. And so somatic therapy is about how do we take those steps to make our body feel safe again so that we have that flexibility to move through the states.
That was so well articulated. I feel like you really took us through each of those branches and kind of understanding how you have kind of blended those to be able to provide a service that meets people where they are, where they feel ready. But also, like, the thing that I'm finding so interesting about that is it sounds like it's almost a reset. It's like pulling us out of the state that we've reached back into a state of what we would probably consider to be like our natural state, which is responding when appropriate versus when it's not as appropriate. And to be honest, like, this is something that I've been navigating personally. Yes, just yesterday on the team, there was like a little bit of flub. Something happened and someone got their feelings hurt, and then they brought it to me. And it was something that in the past, I think my anxiety or my, nervous system response, my nervous system could not have held it the way that I held it yesterday.
Yeah.
And the observation of it is something that I've found really helpful, is like just kind of taking a step back, observing the experience that I'm having and going, okay, is having this awkward conversation actually going to kill me? Or is the confrontation actually going to kill me? Or is this something that I can actively survive? So I'm really curious to understand kind of some of the practices. Like, what does this look like when you work with someone to be able to help them take those steps back or be in a deeper state of recognition, or get into their body? And actually, I'm going to add to this question. Are there practices that you support people with who have felt a profound disconnect to themselves or their bodies? Because, when you're talking about how does this trauma show up in your body, I think of my own journey where thinking of my own therapist, where she's like, where do you feel that in your body? And for years I was like, I don't feel that in my body. It's in my head. It's like, I'm just thinking it. I don't know how to take it into my physical being. So how do you meet people that are, struggle to feel the connection?
Yeah.
And then what are some of like the practices or techniques that you really employ moment to moment with people as they're navigating that?
Yeah, I love this question because I think what I started to notice on social media is that it really becomes about like, let's ground, let's breathe, let's do all these things. And I love those practices. Those practices can be really helpful. And I think for people who are more in like a fight or flight state, that makes sense. They feel comfortable doing that. It feels safe in their body to do that. But for people who have been more in the freeze mode, where the way that they've been surviving is to be more disconnected, me making them sit and be present in their body is so activating. It feels so uncomfortable. And like that just doesn't work, right? Like, why am I going to push someone to be sitting in their body when that's the most triggering thing I could possibly have them do? So I think that it really depends on where folks are at. So in therapy, I always really start with a really solid initial visit so that I really get a good sense of where someone's at, because I don't want to start with grounding if someone has been using disconnection as a way to survive. I think in those cases, it could be really helpful to connect with the environment versus your body initially. And so some examples would be, instead of sitting and breathing, go for a walk and try to find 5 bird songs, or sit and listen to a podcast, right? Like something that makes you feel good with a cozy blanket. And so again, because of neuroception, right? Our nervous system is constantly scanning the environment for safety and danger. We want to make the environment feel safer. So what are some activities that they can do that make them feel safe in the moment, that don't push them into a more activated state? And so that's a good place to start.
Okay. First of all, I'm obsessed with that. The idea of cultivating your environment because even if I think about that energetically, right, to like an energetically sensitive person, for instance, if my home is in disorder, I really struggle to feel regulated. Because I'm scanning at such a high level. I'm perceiving so much. And I'm using myself as an example, but I'm really just, an amalgam of my own listeners and clients, like all the other highly sensitive, hyper, intelligent, spiritually gifted people that show up and receive a place of belonging in this community. Like, it really does make a huge difference when your environment can reflect back to you the things that you need to be mentally, emotionally, physically sort of attuning to or absorbing. I actually use this principle in my my mentorship program. I do a 30-day intuitive mentorship program. And one of the things that we do is we cultivate our environment to reflect that we are gifted people. Like, what are the things that make you feel like a spiritually gifted person? Do you want to put some crystals, some oracle cards, some feathers, like set up your altar space? And the things that we can see actually do make a big difference. And the fact that you recognize that practices like that can be triggering for people feels really significant. I mean, how many times do you hear people say, I've tried meditating, but as soon as I sit down, I feel uncomfortable and my thoughts come rushing in. And it's like, yeah, because the stillness is not feeling safe for you yet. You're not feeling safe to be in that stillness. So I'm curious, once we've been able to cultivate kind of a sense of safety in our environment, or we're starting to kind of slow down, curl up with that blanket, maybe put a little ambiance video on, definitely projecting my own process. Like, what is the next step for getting a little bit into our bodies if we're feeling ready for that?
Yeah. So it's sort of like tiptoeing in. So it's these ideas, and again, these come from polyvagal theory. These are not ideas that I've come up with, but you go, I think they call it pendulation, where you go into your body a little bit, and when it starts to feel overwhelming, you ground again with something in the environment. So that you're just taking these little steps to just experience what it's like to be in your body, even if it's 30 seconds. Like, that is a step forward. And I think especially in the therapy space, co-regulation could be so important. So if they're activated, me holding like a very calm, grounded space can be regulating. And then again, it's totally okay if it feels overwhelming. Let's come back out of it. Let's ground to something in the environment. And we're just going to keep taking those little steps. it's working with your body instead of forcing it to do something, because forcing it is just going to reactivate the trauma. It's all about staying curious and listening. Like, our body is always giving us messages. So I sort of see it as our nervous system, our emotions, our physical sensations. That's all information. Our body is telling us what it wants us to know. And so often when we're disconnected from our bodies, we're just not listening to it at all. So it's, how do we start to listen to it and respect it and show up for it in a way that it feels safe?
Oh, I love this. I feel, honestly, the tone of the conversation, like even just the way that you talk about this, I'm feeling more regulated than I began when I sat down for this conversation. And when you were talking about co-regulation, it was reminding me, whenever, I don't know exactly when this episode is going to come out, but when we're recording it at this present moment, my husband and I are both going through some extremely expansive periods in our business, which feels good. And also, growth is challenging. Like, to grow a business is very demanding and challenging. And we are both experiencing levels of stress we've never experienced before. And my husband is on the spectrum. And so he tends to sit at actually a very regulated state. He just is less impacted by the happenings of life, which has been so healing for me as his partner. Yeah. And because he is less regulated because of the stress that he's under, our co-regulation, we're both just kind of feeding each other stress signals all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's something that we're, conscious of and aware of. And
yeah, that's great.
We're in the process of expansion and growth. So it's like, okay, like we're choosing this, and we're choosing to choose it, and we're choosing to choose it, and we're choosing it for each other. But as you were speaking about that, I was just thinking, wow, like, I wonder what it would be like to have a regulated person in our space right now, like what that would do for us, because the co-regulation I experienced with him in our relationship was just life-changing to me. I've definitely spoken about that on the show too, like being around someone so whole and healed was like truly my whole nervous system entrained to his like rhythm. And it was just such a beautiful healing thing. But, as a sensitive person, thank you. As a sensitive person, when he is in flux, then I start to feel like, my regulated source, which isn't, fair, right? Yeah. Like, he's allowed to have his feelings. Yeah. He's allowed to do his thing.
Yeah.
But, as a highly sensitive, empathetic person, one of the things that actually drew me toward your work was this video I saw you share about empathy burnout. And we are living in a world and in a state where I have personally been feeling, obviously my own experience of this, but working with clients, like being a human being has been something that in my 34 years I've never experienced. I've never felt what we're feeling, ever.
Yeah.
And the collective is responding to that emotionally and energetically. And so I can only imagine that perhaps business has been booming for you this year compared to usual. But I was so curious to have this conversation with you about empathy burnout, because this is something that I think any service provider or professional probably experiences at some point or another. Or any highly sensitive, empathetic, identifying, spiritually gifted person would experience at some point in their life, but more so in this kind of oversaturated, nonstop news cycle and just, shared energetic experience that we're having as a collective. I'm really curious if you can speak to the topic of empathy burnout and help us understand what that is, what it might feel like for us, like how to recognize if we're experiencing that. And then we can move on to maybe some things we could actionably do for ourselves when we're in that state.
So to me, empathy burnout and empathy fatigue are these ideas that it's almost like a learned helplessness. It's that we are taking in so much bad news all the time. I feel like every day it's like a new update throughout the day. Every hour that some horrific thing is happening in our nation or across the world. And learned helplessness is when we start to take this attitude of everything is bad all the time and nothing I do matters. So I just am going to stop paying attention. And the problem with that is that, one, I think, the billionaires in charge want that. They want a populace who is not informed, who's not paying attention, because then we can't advocate for ourselves and our own rights. But also, we can't show up for our community when we just give up. Like, there are people in our community right now that really need us to pay attention and to be showing up. And so I think when we start to feel like I just can't anymore, I don't want to know, it's too much, it's all bad, that's our cue that we're starting to feel that empathy fatigue, that burnout, that's sort of sinking into that learned helplessness feeling.
Wow. You know, the idea that it's a learned helplessness. Also, we're radical over here on the Higher Self Hotline. You could talk about how billionaires are pieces of shit all day long. No problem. Like I could have that conversation. The prison system, billionaires. We could talk about this all day long. And this idea that, you know, we are being taught to feel this way feels really significant. And also, you know, just thinking about the idea of empathy fatigue outside of the news cycle or like what's happening currently, I still feel like highly sensitive or empathetic people experience that day in and day out. And because they're not taught the tools to support themselves as a highly sensitive person, they end up sliding into fatigue, which then I feel creates this like, the word I'm looking for, but like a retraction, like an emotional and social retraction, because I hear frequently spiritually gifted people say, I can't go into crowded spaces, or I can't go into these places. I can't have, they often name experiences, like everyday experiences that they don't feel like they can have because they're not taught how to support themselves in being hyper perceptive, whether that's energetically, emotionally, spiritually. So tell me a little bit about, like, once we recognize that we're in that state where we're either socially, emotionally retracting, feeling the helplessness, like there's nothing I can do, why even bother, which I think there's also layers of intersectionality there about privilege. Some of us get to slide into that feeling more easily than others. I'm curious, once we were in that state of recognition, what are some of the ways that we can begin to support ourselves or just begin to repattern, even if it's a small practice we can implement daily?
Yeah, I love this question. So I think limiting exposure is okay. So I don't think that you have to be tied to your phone, tied to the news, tied to the TikTok updates like every single hour on the hour. I actually think that can be incredibly draining for your energy. So I think carving out time in the day to stay updated. So, you know, subscribe to a Substack or decide that you're going to go on TikTok for that period of time to catch up on the news specifically. Limiting consumption, I think, is one of the biggest things that you can do. And then limit consumption by vetting your sources. So I think so often now with the news, like it's almost like entertainment, it's sensationalized, but the topics that we're hearing about are so emotionally laden already. Like we don't need this sensationalism on top of it. So I would really look for sources where you feel like they're giving you the news straight. They're not adding all these layers of entertainment to it. Vet your sources, see where like the funding comes from, see if they put out corrections, if they make a mistake. Like journalists make mistakes all the time because information changes. So make sure that you're looking at sources that actually care about those types of things. And then I think taking action on the things that you have control over can be big. So finding ways to advocate, donate, volunteer, that pulls us out of learned helplessness because it puts us back in the seat of control where we're actually doing things that are meaningful. Also just looking at your day to day and finding more ways to build in ease and safety in your life, right? So looking at, are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating 3 meals a day? Are you hydrating? Like really taking the time to take care of yourself, because if you let yourself physically burn out, you're not going to be of service to anyone because you're just letting yourself go. And so I think those are a couple different ways where we could limit, be mindful of what we're taking in, and then take care of ourselves and take control by being direct in our volunteering.
Those feel like really responsible approaches, because I totally agree with you. Like unplugging entirely, I don't think is an option in the world that we're in right now. But also being so hyper plugged in. And I honestly think too, I'm curious just to hear your thoughts on this. As we're both creators on TikTok, but I'm also feeling like TikTok has really changed the way that my nervous system experiences information. Like it feels different than TikTok. I mean, than Instagram. And also thinking too, like, okay, the rise of TikTok really coincided with COVID. Like this idea of we're in our homes. And we had this profound social disconnect, which we kind of supplemented with this hyper, ability to just scroll. And I don't think that we've really put the phones down since isolation. And now that there's so much to keep up with, like we're really feeling like, okay, I can't put my phone down. But what you're saying is really responsible, which is you kind of have to. So I'm curious to see if you agree with like that literally just came through as we're having this conversation. Like, do you feel that the shifts in the use of social media have like collectively impacted us in the way that we're receiving information?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think so. TikTok to me is an instant dopamine hit, right? So I'm always thinking like, how is the brain impacting us? So if we're getting an instant dopamine hit every time we're going on TikTok because our For You page knows us so well, it's giving us the things that make us feel good, or make us angry, which again is still a dopamine hit. That matters, right? And so that could be almost like an addictive process too. So it becomes like, how do we find that balance between, there's nothing wrong with going on TikTok and finding your people and finding the things that matter or finding the news sources so you can get informed. But if you're finding yourself using it almost as a way to numb out, then I would say that you're probably skating towards like that freeze mode. And I know for myself, like that was one of the ways that I realized I was in burnout, because I was coming home from work, getting the kids ready, and then I didn't even have the bandwidth to watch a good show on TV anymore or to read a book. Like TikTok was really all I had the bandwidth for. It was that numbing out. So that was the good cue for me that I was heading into that freeze mode.
It's just thinking about, I wanted to have this conversation because I found you on TikTok. I'm a big scroller on TikTok, at least at the time this is being recorded. Maybe I'll do a dopamine detox or something. But, I think the idea of creating content for the platform that can redirect our attention, that can bring us into ourselves, like truly, I felt compelled to stop and watch your video because it really felt like you were speaking to me. I was feeling that empathy fatigue and, trying to find your way back into a state of a balance where you feel like, okay, here's something I can do. It's actionable. It's small. But you also mentioned something that feels really important too, that I kind of would like to come back to about community, because when we're looking at, this information and we're feeling like the problems are so big and widespread and global, it does feel insurmountable. But I think about the times that I serve at like feeding centers with my loved ones. And it's like, we serve 500 meals in a night. Like that feels like it's actually doing something and making a difference. So I'm curious if you can speak to, ways that we can support our nervous system and our communities at the same time. Like, what does that look like?
I mean, I think it's finding things that do give back and at the same time don't overwhelm or drain you, right? So if you're recognizing that you are at your burnout limit, right, that might not be a good week to go volunteer to do something, right? I think it really comes down to that balance. Like, I think that it's important to find ways to give back in your communities, but at the same time, check in with yourself and figure out where you are in that burnout spectrum, because just pushing yourself to do things because you should do it is just a sure way to feel really drained. And again, that's when we get to burnout and we don't have any energy left for anybody if we're not listening to our bodies.
Everything you're saying just reminds me of how slowing down is so important. Like slowing down to hear your body, slowing down to disconnect from the things that allow us to be mindless and support us in being mindful. Like it feels like everything can kind of be solved by being willing to just pause before we take action. But I do kind of want to circle back here because I feel like as I'm even saying that, I can hear listeners being like, well, how? Like, how do I slow down? How do I get myself to stop doom scrolling when I know it's not good for me, but it's the way that I'm comfortable numbing out? It's like, I don't, like, just like you shared, I don't have the attention span for a show. I'm burned out. Even the ways that we're just sitting there consuming can feel totally overwhelming. So what is like one actionable step when we notice ourselves doom scrolling? Let's say we notice the pattern, we decide to put down our phones. what can we do instead? Is it a practice to get into our body? Is it a somatic technique? Like, meet me in that moment.
Yeah. I would say I'm going to give you a in the moment one, and then I'm going to give you a bigger picture one. So in the moment, I would say, is there something that you could do instead that's going to feel good in the moment and is going to feel good after? Like for me, I know if I'm doom scrolling, it feels great in the moment, but after I feel kind of drained and sometimes icky if I not wasted, but I spent like a whole hour and there were other things in my mind that I wanted to do. So really trying to figure out, is there an alternative that feels good now and will feel good an hour from now? The bigger picture for me is, how do you get your life into more alignment? And so for me, this looks like, are you doing the things in your life, whether that's daily, weekly, monthly, that actually light you up? So like if you asked yourself, if I had a free week and I could do anything I wanted, if it was like paid PTO, I could do any of the things I wanted, I could spend it with any of the people that I wanted. Are you actually doing any of those things in your life now? And if the answer is no, then I would say that your life may be out of alignment a bit. And figuring out ways to get it back into alignment can have a big impact on how we feel emotionally, energetically, physically. And that could be a bigger picture thing to look at.
This might be too big of a question to answer on the podcast, but I do often find people who, especially in my work as an intuitive, I feel like people often came to me wanting me to give them answers about what would be alignment for them, like what alignment would look like in their lives. So for people who struggle to understand what they might want more of because they're so habituated to denying themselves anything but what they need to do or say or feel in order to just make it through the day, what are some of the things that we might be able to ask ourselves to come to some of those answers, or how can we come to deeper clarity within ourselves about even just top 3 things that we might want to start creating more room for in our lives?
I sometimes find that asking yourself what you like to do when you were younger, like when you were a kid, like what were the things that lit you up, is such a good starting point, because sometimes we just fall out of that and go into adulting mode. And when we're kids, like we feel so free. We do the things that we want to do just because we want to do them. And so that could be a good place to start. Like think back, were you really into art? Were you into animals? Were you into music? Like what were the things that really lit you up? And what would it feel like to do those things again now?
That's my favorite answer. I always turn to my inner child for advice. I'm like, what would she wear? What would she do? What is she like? Just today, my friend was like, I tried to get us Hillary Duff tickets for Christmas, but I waited in line and they sold out. And I was like, honestly, let's just do our own concert in the living room. Like, let's like put on all of her music videos and dance and sing around to them. Like, let's have our experience. Like that's what I would have done with my best friends when I was 7.
Mm-hmm.
And I guarantee after a night of doing that, I will feel recharged.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes recharge, I think, does look like doing something active versus, being passive or doom scrolling. So I'm curious if you agree with that. Like, does it sometimes look active, or does it always have to look passive?
No, I think it could absolutely look active. To me, it's like what lights you up. That's the stuff that recharges you, right? So I would almost like check in with yourself after you're doing something and just be curious about it. Maybe you go try something and you end up not liking it, but that's not bad. Like that's just information. So now you know, like, okay, cross this off the list. Like this doesn't light me up. But if you find something that makes you feel good, you'll know, you feel it. Like you just feel like that gut check, like, oh, I love this. Like you feel drawn to it. So that is really, it's just like experimenting, like experiment more in your life and try new things and see, does it make you feel good?
I agree with this wholeheartedly. I feel like this is guidance that I've been giving people for years. And, I'm always so amazed at the way that we can argue for our limitations.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I tell people, go try things, they'll be like, well, I don't know where to start. And so I say, go back to your inner child. What would they tell you to do? They're like, well, I tried it and I didn't like it actually. And it's like, well, that's not the end of the road. Like you have to be willing to, if you really want change, and I think this is something you'd probably agree with, like if you really want change, you have to do something different than what you're doing.
Yeah.
And even if at first you're feeling challenged by that, like if you're having, if you don't have enough energy to watch a movie, what kind of energy do you have to get yourself out in the world and show up for like a knitting class?
Yeah.
But I think it is like repatterning does require that we do kind of a hard reset. Like there's got to be something that we move ourselves from toward. So I'm curious, when you have people that are maybe combative, where they're like, I don't know, or it doesn't work for me. Like, what do you kind of say or do to support them in maybe shifting that mindset a little bit? Like, what does that look like for them?
I usually try to roll with it and like explore like, okay, like there's a part of you that really is not happy about this idea. Like, let's talk to that part. Like, what does that part have to say? Like, what are they keeping you safe from? Like, how are they trying to show up and protect you? Because I think we have all these different parts of us and they're all serving a purpose, right? Like, so if there's some resistance there that's serving a purpose, like let's roll with it and see what it's trying to tell us.
I really love that answer. I think it was honestly, I asked the question because I really wanted to know the answer. And it feels so good to hear, like getting curious with the part of you. Like if you're feeling really intractable and you're just like, I don't seem to be able to change this behavior of mine. Like I don't seem to get myself out of this. Getting curious with that part of yourself. And, you know, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe that looks like just asking that part of you a series of questions, like having a conversation. And it seems like you directed us into a really good initial question, which is like, what are you protecting me from?
Absolutely. I always think back to that period when I felt like I was in that burnout and that freeze. And if you had asked me in the moment, I would have been like, I have nothing left. Like I'm doing this because this is what I've got to give. And I think I probably would have been pretty resistant to someone saying like, you need to figure out something else because I was already tapped out. Like, what do you mean I have to do something else? I'm already doing all the things. But it's interesting, right? Because when I think about being in alignment, if you had asked me then, the same question that you would ask me now, like what lights you up, I probably would have said the same things, like quality time with my family and music and being around animals and being in nature. But I wasn't doing any of those things. I was on autopilot. I was working. I was numbing out when I got home. I was spending weekends catching up, trying to get the household back in order. And I probably couldn't even have given you a time where I was connecting with music or animals or nature in the last 2 months. And so that's really important information because I was totally out of alignment. But if you had asked me in the moment, I'd be like, oh yeah, I love those things. Like these are great things. They're really important to me, but I wasn't doing them. And so again, it's just our nervous systems show up and do what they need to in the moment. In the moment, my freeze state was trying to protect me from being burned out and overwhelmed. And that's totally okay. But if we start to ask ourselves these little questions and just get curious about like, well, why is this mismatch between what I say I want to do and what I'm actually doing? That opens up more information so we can make some different choices.
This approach just feels so gentle. Like it feels, especially as someone hypersensitive, like I do find that being asked questions or asking questions of parts of myself, like with curiosity versus accusation or judgment or frustration, it's like, instead of like, why am I like this? It's like, why am I like this? Like, why is this how I'm choosing to respond? Like, how can I help myself do this differently? So I'm just so comforted by this conversation. And, I think it's important for listeners to know, like, there is no magic switch. You don't just change your nervous system by, flipping a magic switch. It is a process, and it's one where it sounds like we have to get curious with ourselves, or we have to be willing to, hear and respond to the things that come up from within us. And, when you were talking about like, okay, your own journey, some of those things that came up for you, like, oh, well, I like spending time with the animals, my children, those can feel quite like abstract or simple or just vague. And I think what I'm really hearing from you, and I want to just clarify, is this true, is that it's okay for it to be vague. Like, it's okay for you to not know, oh, I specifically like to use crayons and make artwork. Like, you're allowed to just say, I want to be creative and start to unfold from there. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't even think I could have ever imagined 2 years ago, like what those things would end up looking like for me now. So we actually live near a zoo now and we have a membership and we try to go at least once a month. And I love animals. So this lights me up. But like this idea, I don't even think it would have occurred to me 2 years ago. I would just be like, oh yeah, I love animals. Like this is important to me. But it's just this like, you see it. We went to the zoo once and I felt so lit up. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I want to come back here all the time. I want to make sure we have a membership. It's using like that feeling to guide what your next steps are.
Which, guys, that's your intuition. Hello. Also, this idea too that like the time at the zoo is you getting to do multiple things at once. Because I'm not imagining that you're going to the zoo by yourself, although maybe in a nice little quiet afternoon stroll. But it sounds like this is a great way for you to be outdoors, be around animals, and be with your family all at the same time, which is like a super recharge. I love that. I love that. Also want to say for any listeners out there, Arizona zoos are rehabilitative and restorative. So the animals are being rehabilitated and cared for. They're not just being enslaved for our entertainment.
That's part of the vibe, is that they just look so happy and have such really nice habitats. Yeah.
One of my favorite things that I don't know if you guys have ever done. Have you done zoo lights? This is just conversation between two people.
Yeah, no, I haven't.
Oh, Dr. Katie, if I may.
Yeah.
I don't know if they do them down in Tucson, but up here in Phoenix, we do zoo lights at the holidays, and they light up the entire zoo with like this incredible light show. It's like the ones you get to drive through, but you walk through it, and it's at night. And there are people there that, like last time I was there was a volunteer who I just happened to meet. She was standing at the lion den that I was standing at, and she was telling me about how the cubs were rescued and how they formed the family. And like, it was the highlight of my life. And I was there with one of my best friends, like little babies. She had a 1-year-old at the time. And I was like, this is the best day of my life. And watching the joy on his face. So I highly recommend zoo lights to you and your family. If that's something that you like.
Yeah, we'll check it out this season.
One of my last questions for you is that, about some of the therapy intensives that you've created. You've created these intensives for those who want to go deeper into their healing. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about the process of creating those, and also, how people can experience that work with you.
So I really wanted to come up with different ideas to try to meet people where they're at, because I think I recognize that people have different capacities at any given time to do that type of therapeutic work. So I think weekly therapy works great for a lot of people. They really like that consistent contact. But I also saw that there were some folks who they either would be like in the midst of a stuck point, or they would feel like they really wanted to kind of front load things, like they wanted to make a lot of change all at once, or they just didn't have time in their weekly schedule. And so in my mind, the intensives are really a time where we have a couple hours to really dig in. And so it's sort of like I combine my initial visit where I'm gathering information to also really sit with them and stay with it. And I found that it helps to almost like regulate the nervous system in a way, because in that space, we're together for a couple hours, we can stay in that place of feeling safe and going deeper and exploring, as opposed to kind of diving in and then coming out each week. So to me, it was just another way to meet people where they're at. And then I also do some workshops too, because I recognize that sometimes people are just not in a place where they're ready to do therapy at all. And I think that's completely okay. Like if you are at a place where you just don't have the capacity to do that deeper work, in my mind, the workshops, or they're similar to this. They're me providing education skills that you have when you're ready to use them, but just recognizing that not everybody is in the space where they're able to do that deeper work. And that is perfectly okay, because again, I'm all about sort of honoring where your nervous system is at. And I think that's the most important piece of it, is just recognizing what feels good for you in a given moment, so that we can work with that.
Well, Dr. Katie Carhart, I have really, really enjoyed this conversation. I'm so grateful for your insights, and I just feel like you were the perfect person to have this conversation with, to help us understand the ways that our body and our nervous system respond to the experiences that we have, how we can shift our response to those experiences to support us in finding a deeper inner peace. So I'm really curious if you would let us know where we can experience your content, your workshops, how people can explore the option of working with you more deeply, tell us about where we can find you.
So Align and Empower Therapy is the name of my practice. You can find me at my website, which is www.alignandempowertherapy.com. So that's where you'd be able to book with me for individual therapy, for intensives. The way to find me on TikTok or Instagram is Align and Empower Therapy. That's my username. And I try to use those spaces really just to provide little bits of education on mental health, wellness, neurodivergence, polyvagal theory, all of that. I feel like I have all this information that I want people to have because I know it could be life changing. So I try to get it out there.
I think the name of your practice is just so perfect because you really are helping people to align their lives and to feel empowered. And I think you're doing it. So I just can't thank you enough for being here today, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your voice, and for showing up. I know, I'm a service provider. It's not always easy. It takes a lot out of you. And then to take all of your knowledge and put it on the internet for people for free, for them to consume and receive and learn from and be healed by. I mean, it is truly a labor of love and a service that you bring to this world. So I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to highlight you today. And thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been so fun. I appreciate it.
There you have it, blessed babes. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode. And I would love if we could take a moment to send this week's subject, Dr. Katie Carhart, some love, sweetness, and positivity as she continues to help us feel aligned and empowered through therapy. If you're interested in being on the podcast, send an email to podcast@zoegreco.com. Don't forget to submit your Higher Self Hotline questions for the Let Me Ask My Psychic segment. And of course, I want to conclude by reminding you that you are important. You matter and you are perfect exactly as you are. I love you. Your spirit guides love you. Dr. Katie Carhart loves you, and the universe loves you. So until next time, keep answering the call of your higher self. Bye, friends.